The Bible contains the mind of God, the state of man, the way of salvation, the doom of sinners, and the happiness of believers. Its doctrines are holy, its precepts are binding, its stories are true, and its decisions are immutable. Read it to be wise, believe it to be safe, and practice it to be holy. It contains light to direct you, food to support you, and comfort to cheer you. It is the traveler's map, the pilgrim's staff, the pilot's compass, the soldier's sword, and the Christian's charter. Here, paradise is restored, heaven opened, and the gates of hell disclosed. Christ is its grand subject, our good the design, and the glory of God its end. It should fill the memory, rule the heart, and guide the feet. Read it slowly, frequently, and prayerfully. It is a mine of wealth, health to the soul, and a river of pleasure. It involves the highest responsibility, will reward the greatest labor, and will condemn all who trifle with its sacred contents. Pray it in, read it through, live it out, and pass it on.
Welcome to Unlocking the Bible Lesson 3. The last lesson finished at the Tower of Babel. God commanded Noah to be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth, but the people became rebellious and full of pride. God had to divide the people by creating new languages for them to speak, which confused and scattered them. Soon, the families of Shem, Ham, and Japheth separated, and nations began to form. Shem's lineage included the nation of Israel and eventually Jesus Christ. From the lineage of Shem, a man named Abram would be guided by God to start a family and nation which would come to be known as Israel. Abraham started both the nation of Israel and the Arab nations. It was at this time that God stopped dealing with the entire world, and he started dealing exclusively with the Israelites, the descendants of Abraham. They were to be God's examples of how people can be blessed by entering into a covenant relationship with him. This period of time is known as the time of the patriarchs. A patriarch is the male family or clan head. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were known as the heads and founders of the nation of Israel. Abraham was known as the father of the faithful. Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 and 3 says, "Now the Lord had said to Abram, 'Get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed.'" Although Abraham was known as the father of the faithful, he wasn't automatically so faithful. In the beginning of his walk with God, he struggled with his faith, just like every one of us does. Genesis chapter 12, verses 11 through 13 says, "And it came to pass, when he was close to entering Egypt, that he said to Sarai his wife, 'Indeed, I know that you are a woman of beautiful countenance. Therefore, it will happen when the Egyptians see you that they will say, 'This is his wife,' and they will kill me, but they will let you live. Please, say you are my sister, that it may be well with me for your sake, and that I may live because of you." Notice, he thought that he would live because of Sarai's manipulation of truth and not because of God's power. The Apostle Paul also started out a different man, but he changed for the better when he allowed God to transform him. Acts 8:3 says, "As for Saul, he made havoc of the church, entering every house and dragging off men and women, committing them to prison." Acts 9:1-2 says, "Then Saul, still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord, went to the high priest and asked letters from him to the synagogues of Damascus, so that if he found any who were of the way, whether men or women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem." Many times we doubt ourselves and say these things. "I could never live for God like some people," or "You don't know the terrible things I've done," or "I don't know that much about God or the Bible." What God is looking for is someone who will allow God to use them, not someone who is perfect. It is important for us to understand that it is not because of our goodness that God will use us, but it is because of our willingness to allow God to continually change our lives and perfect us into the image of Jesus Christ. So, why do you suppose God picked Abraham or used the Jews as his chosen nation? Number one, he obeyed God. Abraham simply obeyed God when told to leave his country. Abraham was picked because he was obedient, and obedience is the most important requirement for pleasing God. Genesis 12:4 says, "So Abram departed as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran." Number two, he believed God. The Bible also says that Abraham believed God. Genesis 15:6, "And he believed in the Lord, and he accounted it to him for righteousness." The word believe in Hebrew is translated unqualified committal of oneself to another. So completely did Abraham trust God that he was ready to totally commit himself to him. Key number one, believing and obeying will bring God's blessing. Interesting point. The first 11 chapters of the book of Genesis cover 2,000 years of history. The next 14 chapters are all about Abraham. The reason for so many chapters is this: there are important things that can be learned from Abraham's life. The Lord promised Abraham many children, and he became the father of the Arab nations. In Genesis 15:5, it says, "Then he brought him outside and said, 'Look now toward heaven and count the stars if you are able to number them.' And he said to him, 'So shall your descendants be.'" But they had no children. Abraham and Sarah became impatient and wanted the promise before it was time. So they took matters in their own hands. Sarah's servant Hagar birthed Abraham a child. Genesis 16, verses 1-4 says, "Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, and she had an Egyptian maidservant whose name was Hagar. So Sarai said to Abram, 'See now, the Lord has restrained me from bearing children. Please, go into my maid. Perhaps I shall obtain children by her. And Abram heeded the voice of Sarai. Verse 3, then Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, and gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife. And after Abraham had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, so he went into Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress became despised in her eyes.